This presentation includes forward-looking statements that are subject to risks and uncertainties. Actual results may differ materially as a result of various risk factors, including those described in the 10Ks, 10Qs, and 8Ks VMware files with the SEC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sanjay Poonen.
Freedom! Freedom! Come on, freedom! All right. Give it up for the Big Barcelona Disco Little Hell Band. Thank you very much. Great to be with you all. We have a record attendance of 13,000 people here, so we thought we'd get you a live band. What'd you guys think of the show so far? It's been a great day. Thank you for the great keynotes, and thank you for all being here. Some fantastic announcements. I'm super excited to host today's keynote. We've got a lot of exciting things over the course of the next 90 minutes, so giddy up. As we think about what's going on in this world, you know, there are lots of different things in which you could think about VMware. We've been known as a server virtualization company. Over time, we've tried to now be known as the data center. We'd like to be now known as the cloud infrastructure company. But there are two engines that fuel VMware that haven't changed over the 20 years of our existence. One is innovation. This company believes that what we can do, not just in technology and go-to-market, but starting with technology, is groundbreaking. Starting off with research by a husband and wife team that transformed what could be done in an x86 architecture. And much of you knew that early form of VSX has been the key aspect. But just as important to us has been an obsession with customer satisfaction. These two engines are sort of like the two engines of a plane. A lot of companies have incredible innovation, but they don't really care a lot about their customers. A lot of companies care about their customers, but don't have a lot of pipeline of innovation. When you can bring these two together, you get magic. And the plane can go a long way. And that's what we've been focused on. Innovation. From the beginning of the advent of this company. Server virtualization. Fundamental. Doing something that was exponentially better. Not just incrementally better, exponentially better. 2009, I went to look back at some of the first patents that we filed. We were one of the first in the industry to invent software-defined storage. And driving the same software-defined aspect to every aspect of infrastructure. Then in 2012, when we announced the acquisition of Nicira, the world took notice when we said there was a different way to do networking with software-defined networking. And then as we put together the notion of a software-defined digital workspace, bringing together disparate technologies, virtual desktops, mobility, identity. I was very fortunate to lead that part of the business for the first 3 years of my 5 years here at VMware. Tremendously exciting what's going to happen in that area, which we'll talk about. And through the course of this year and with what's going to last us for the last 2 years, we've been really focused on this notion of a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and making networking something that ties together all of these aspects, what we call virtual cloud networking. This has been our theme. Innovation starts everything, but just as important has been that obsession with customer satisfaction. And this is all of you getting to vote on what the industry ranks as Net Promoter Score. There's an organization called Temkin Research that ranks, just like the J.D. Powers of organizations that rank airlines, ranks companies, and we've been very fortunate in the last 5 years to be ranked in the top 5 and this year #1. And we've taken that to a whole new level. Our customer support organizations rolled out now a solution called Skyline. It allows, with your permission, to track telemetry and take much of that information and make our support processes not just reactive, but extremely proactive. 1,000 customers of you have already signed up. I've encouraged every one of you to be all over Skyline. We're going to take customer success to a whole new level. But the story of VMware is very simple. I want to just boil this down. I like to call it Sesame Street simple. Because, you know, Da Vinci said there's a tremendous amount of sophistication in simplicity. At the core of what we do in a data center, you could think of it like a human body. Compute's like the heart. Maybe storage is like the lungs that store stuff. Networking is like your nervous system. And management's like the brain, it pulls it all together. And when you do things in software, you fundamentally transform the data center. But that data center, as it moves to the cloud, needs a way by which you don't have to redo those applications, and that's the journey of the hybrid cloud. The same type of journey happens in the world of the desktop, moving mobile into the edge. All centered around the core premise that applications are what infrastructure serves. Without applications, infrastructure wouldn't exist. And what ties us all together is security. That's very simply put our one chart. When I share this with our sales teams, I say this one chart, if you have to present our story with 100 PowerPoints, you probably have very little power and no point. Okay? So we want to make this very simple to you. Now, this impact across has been tremendous over the years. It's impacted the way in which we think about cost. It's impacted the way in which we've reduced complexity. It's impacted the way in which we've reduced carbon. The 3 C's, as I like to call them. The collective impact has been profound. And if you take that first part, vSphere, these were some of the first things we saw when we started the company. I wasn't here, but I heard stories about this that are legendary. People would send us their electricity bills and said, this is what vSphere did for us, ESX did for us before and after. Here's the electricity bill. It's in US dollars because, you know, the company was in the America based there. 80% reduction in something as simple as the way in which you do your cost management of power. And that impact was tremendous over the years. Thanks to you, the company over the course of 20 years has accumulated about $50 billion in revenue. Last year, we ended up somewhere around $8 billion in revenue and continuing to grow. One of the fastest growing software companies of all time. And I pulled up a study that was done in 2006, I think, of the economic impact that VMware has had. And that time, we just had 1 or 2 products, maybe compute and management. And it showed in that report that every dollar spent on VMware resulted in between $9 and $26 of economic impact in 2006. I could argue that economic impact's actually grown as our product portfolio has grown. But let's just say we take somewhere in between that 9 and 26 and round it up to a 10. That $50 billion of collective revenue over the 20 years has resulted in 10x of economic value to that. So $500 billion of economic value to you. And we're not done. This is one of the stories that's been the most legendary of all time in terms of economic impact. And that's what I wanted to continue to impress on you as you think about the future products. So we have 500,000 customers. I think roughly about 200,000 in EMEA. If you have experienced that type of economic benefit on compute, the first way in which you can embark on the journey in the private cloud is with software-defined storage and hyperconverged infrastructure. It is the easiest way to begin that journey. Compute, storage, and management together, and the economic impact is just as profound. We did some studies with IDC and a few other analysts and found that CapEx savings could be 40%, OpEx savings almost 60%, and the ROI in triple digits. Amazing what storage can do for you. It's the first place you can start. But not to be outdone, networking is a little trickier. But let me walk you through why this could also have a tremendous impact on you. Typically, when we looked at networking problems today, pre the use of software-defined networking, they look like this. 30% spent on hardware, maybe a little bit of 5% odd on software, and 65% on labor-oriented tasks. Okay? And now, the labor-oriented tasks you just don't, kind of see, but it starts to accumulate because everything is manual. And let me give you the perfect example of a manual type of task in life that if you saw today, you said, why would you do that? Imagine that you printed out a document and you manually spell-checked every word. If you did that to you, you'd be, listen, it's going to be error-prone, and there's a wonderful thing called a spell check. Why don't you do it? It's software-defined spell check. It's the same thing in networking. You'd be surprised how many of these tasks can be radically transformed through software. Okay, when you apply that principle, that chart starts to look significantly different. Certainly, you reduce a little bit of what you're doing because you extend the life of your hardware. We're not telling you you've got to rip out Cisco or Arista or Juniper. You optimize the use of your underlay and just got to invest more in the overlay. That investment in OpEx comes down significantly. And that's even before you think about some of the new areas that we are investing significantly going into the future. For example, just came out a few weeks ago was the Gartner Magic Quadrant on software-defined WAN. And who would have thought that VMware is the top right spot in networking? What do you guys think? Isn't that incredible? Thanks to every one of you who's invested in VeloCloud. We are just getting started. Networking is going to be huge. So when you put this together then with management, we could talk to the heart, the lungs, the nervous system, management's the brain. So what does the brain do? It automates everything. That's the first A. Then it provides analytics. And then, of course, the part that I find most exciting, artificial intelligence. Okay? And we're going to bring the power of artificial intelligence to make that same SDDC, which was the software-defined data center, the self-driving data center in the future. And you'll find things like Watson that we announced yesterday with support, making that a whole lot better. So when you put this all together, this is the money chart. If you weren't paying any attention to my slides, I see a few cameras coming up. This is the chart you want to capture, okay? Because it encompasses now, once you've got that foundation, where should you deploy this? Should you deploy this in a private cloud or a public cloud? Here's the study we did, again with a group of analysts, with 1,000 VMs, and said, listen, let's take a traditional hardware architecture with a little bit of software virtualization. It costs for that type of environment 4.5 million euros, okay? Traditional on-prem with a little bit of virtualization. Now you go full on, the full SDDC stack on-premise, you reduce the cost quite a bit, 2.9 million euros with an on-premise infrastructure, private cloud, full software-defined data center. Now you have a choice. You want to take that app and redo it, refactor it, migrate it to the public cloud. On the surface, it's a little cheaper. But when you add up the cost of refactoring and migrating that app, it gets more expensive. We think the most economic option, and validated by some of our analyst friends, is this hybrid cloud option of deploying this in a VMware cloud, like, for example, VMware Cloud 80%. We get a 40% reduction. So it's profound, okay? What we can do for you as you think about the economic impact of all of this. So summary, the data center moves to the cloud. We want to ensure with you a timeless, okay, way in which you can think about economic impact. Whether you choose the private cloud or the public cloud, you need VMware in both environments. Okay? So with that, it gives me great privilege to bring our first panel onto the stage, who are going to talk more about this part of the journey with us. Join me in welcoming Fran Heeren from Vodafone, Erez Rakmil from Playtika, and Ed Higgs from Mentical. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you. All right, Freedom, that's a great song. Well, listen, when we talk about that sort of any cloud, any app, any design, that's sort of the freedom we want people at. One of the clouds we talked about yesterday, Fran, was telco. And it's amazing, Vodafone's one of the biggest brands in the world. Yep. And traditionally, VMware has played in the telco, in the IT industry, but on the IT side of things. But together, we've been embarking on something extremely transformative that moves in the networking area. Why don't you talk a little bit about what's changing in the telco industry and what led to this, partnership with VMware and Vodafone together?
Sure. Thanks, Sanjay. So good morning, everyone. So I guess the key message today is 5G. 5G is coming in the industry. It'll be here very, very soon. I won't say quite when for obvious reasons, but we're in advanced stages of testing 5G in our main markets, including here in Spain. But it's actually a journey that we began probably 3 or 4 years ago with VMware in terms of putting in place the foundations for what 5G will be. So the level of agility, the level of automation, abstraction that we needed, we began building back 3 or 4 years ago. So NFV is the popular industry term, Network Function Virtualization, very specific for the telco network. And that's something I think we have to change, and we can talk more about that. But began putting in place those building blocks of the core network functions, our voice core, our data core, virtualizing them and taking them on that path to cloud and automation. So while we're doing that, and that process is well underway, and I think yesterday Pat mentioned a figure of about 10%. We're significantly ahead of that in Vodafone, but we started early, and we started with VMware very early. At the same time we were doing that, we also began a path to transform our IT estate. So in telco, you hear the term network and IT being two very different things. That needs to change, but we began to move those support functions as well into virtualization and then on into cloud. So on the IT side of the house, so to speak, we're now looking at public cloud and really looking at where we place those IT applications. And in some markets we have a policy of software as a service first for IT, then public cloud, and then if we have to, we'll host it ourselves. So 2 different speeds, 2 different tracks that I think they have to converge at some point, but all really paving the way for that 5G promise, which is going to come next year.
So you've got the IT cloud, you've got the network cloud and the public cloud, and you need a software abstraction layer across all of those.
And the key challenge there is making those clouds look as consistent as possible, because moving workloads between, making that decision, is going to be easier if we have that level of consistency, where before in this industry you've tended to be a little bit different, a little bit more abstracted, and that is and will change.
Great. Well, Erez, let's move to you a little bit. Folks may not know about Playtika, but I began to get a little bit of an understanding of your company and the industry, online gaming. My understanding is online gaming is a bigger industry than Hollywood. Is that true?
Hollywood and the music business together, and
Hollywood
actually
and
almost
music.
double of it. Double it, and you'll.
And this is before 5G.
This is before 5G.
I mean,
yes.
I bet both of you are colluding together to make sure people buy more online games. But tell us a little bit about why in the gaming industry, you've got to move agile, you've got a lot of your workloads sitting on premise, how you embarked on the journey with VMware as it relates to the hybrid cloud.
Okay. So we are growing very rapidly. Like you mentioned, the gaming industry going super fast going forward, super fast. Our demands for more environments, more compute power, more environments for developers, for testers is constantly growing. We actually each year we are planning our growth. We are planning, we are putting huge buffer, and still the industry push us much faster. We had to grow faster and scale up to the cloud. We contact our partners in VMware, decided we want to scale up with the VMware on cloud. And after a very short POC, we immediately moved into production environment.
This is VMware Cloud on AWS.
Yes, VMware on cloud on AWS, yes. And actually, few days after that, we already been with more than almost 1,000 VMs on VMware AWS. So
that's great, and we watched those VMs grow. The bulk of your workloads are still on-premise in the private cloud, but as you embark on this journey in the public cloud.
And it gives us great flexibility.
Now, you didn't stop there. I mean, you were also keen enough to say, hey, I'm going to go embark on this journey with us in containers, and became one of our first adopters of PKS. Yes. Why so?
So for us, the container journey is a natural course for a technology company like ours. It gives us also, again, flexibility and agility in develop faster, the containers technology. And for us, using PKS is actually give us the ability to enjoy both VMware management capabilities and the flexibility of the containers and Kubernetes. So for us, it was a win-win situation.
Erez, you'll be happy to know I've got PKS socks on. Right? So all the PKS fans were happy to know, and you saw us make the announcement yesterday of the acquisition Kubernetes. And I just want to reinforce for everybody in the audience, this is a significant move for VMware. We are making a big bet on Kubernetes as the container platform, seeking to become the enterprise platform company for Kubernetes. And if you've seen these ads, these have been ads in some of the airports, like you'll see this at London Heathrow Airport. We have these sort of ads going around which are a play on the word where, anywhere. We think VMware, the virtual machine, the future of that could be just as important with containerware. And hopefully that gives many of you who are looking at the opportunity for Kubernetes. Hey, so one of the things, Erez, before I move to Ed, you guys do a lot of profiling in AI and analytics of the type of people that game.
Play the games, right.
Is any of them a 40-something Indian American in your AI data that you collect?
So yes, it's about like 45 years old, North American woman.
North American woman. Okay,
right.
That explains why I don't get much work done with Robin Matlock, our CMO. Just kidding. She's playing games all the time. Just kidding. Hey, Ed, let's talk another exciting industry. But not many people know what Rentokil does, but it's in 70 different countries. What do you guys do? Because the name itself sort of is self-explanatory, but why don't you explain it to people?
So we're the world's leading pest control company. As you say, we operate in 74 countries. We've got about
any pest?
Any pest, within reason.
Okay. I was just watching on YouTube this, post the floods that have happened in Florida and other places. There was somebody's house that had an alligator inside it. Could I call Rent-A-Kill for that situation?
I'm pretty sure you can. We've got some quite diverse teams around the world. So in Indonesia, for example, we've got a specialist Python team.
Python saving in Indonesia.
Python saving. So not long ago, we had about 12 people had to go and rescue a 16-foot python, and there's pictures of them all very happily parading this python found underneath the kitchen sink.
All right, okay, let's get back to software. But when you think about, that just scares me, the idea of Python in your backyard. But when you think about software, you made the big bet with us on software-defined storage and vSAN on-premise. And you're managing hundreds of terabytes in that environment, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. We've talked a lot about the buzzwords over the last 2 days. We've talked about agility and simplicity, cost-effectiveness. And really that solution for us ticks all those boxes. We've reduced our footprint in the data centers, we've reduced the amount we spend on power, etc. And really for the management overhead, it's really reduced it. So the complexity, the simpleness of managing it has really benefited us.
So you embarked on that first stage, as I said, of creating a private cloud with software-defined storage. But then you took the next step into networking with not just NSX, but you were bold enough to embark in this sort of very distributed environment in our branch solution, VeloCloud. Maybe you can talk about the networking journey and why VeloCloud.
So we went to market about 3 years ago to understand what do we do with our global WAN. And we had a number of challenges at the time around, we're seeing the workload shift between the data center and cloud. We're big users of Google Hangouts, so the intense requirement on the bandwidth. We also had to get the internet access as close as possible to the end user. So going back to those buzzwords, we've now got about 500 sites globally on the VeloCloud solution across 34 countries. And it's a great success. So going back to those kind of buzzwords, agility, we're very acquisitive in Rent-A-Kill. So we've bought 80 companies since the start of 2017. So for us to be able to bring those on within a matter of days, as soon as we can get a box to site, we can bring those on securely onto our network. It is simple. So you don't need a load of CCIE qualified people globally. We've got a small number of SMEs who create the architecture, create the templates, profiles, and then actually doesn't take someone from IT to plug it in locally. And cost effectiveness is obviously key for us. We're migrating the UK next year. We're achieving up to 500% of the bandwidth with multiple links, resiliency, at about 80% of the cost.
That's great. And I know that you're also doing stuff with us in Workspace ONE. I could have had you in both panels, the one next coming in next. Gentlemen, I'd like to understand a little bit of where you see your world going. Maybe I'll start with you, Fran. There's so much of where 5G is going to transform everything, but just maybe point to a few things of what your vision of where you want to take some of the things that we're doing together into the future.
If I think of just the cloud itself, I mean, cloud is the short answer to the question, I think. And I mentioned earlier, traditionally we've had these very clear differentiations between our different technology estates. That's going to go. It has to go. And for us, it becomes a workload placement problem, right? So you heard terms like NFV, VNF, and so on. Everything is a workload. It's an IT workload. It's a network workload. The challenge is, where do you place that workload based on its demands? Things like latency, security, price. And if we look at all the different possible locations for someone like Vodafone, we've got our main technology centers. We have 3 in Europe. We've then got regional or local technology centers in every country where we operate. We'll have the edge technology centers. So you're moving out more towards the customer to handle latency challenges. And then you have public cloud and multiple choice there. So the challenge is having a scientific process and a motion-free process for saying, where do I place this workload, whether IT or network? And then when you make the decision, having a tool set and a tool chain to make that happen easily. And I think that's where VMware's portfolio plays well into this. And remove those differentiations. I think you'll see it happen faster on the IT side in terms of that multiple choice. On network, we'll extend to the edge. But I wouldn't say never in terms of network functions running in public cloud. We're seeing some very interesting experiments being done by public cloud providers on some core network functions. I think the challenge will be less of a technical one and more of a legal regulatory challenge there as well. But for us, it's key. Give us a common tool chain that gives us a holistic view of all of those options and lets us make the right choice for the business.
Great. We're running out of time, but I would like to ask you guys all one last question. And be nice to us as we ask you this question. I'm sure there are things VMware can improve. Any of you like to talk about what we could do better?
So I think that what I would like to see in the future is more on-demand services.
On-demand services.
On-demand services. Again, we mentioned that we are using VMware on AWS cloud. I want to see it more on-demand, more ability to consume as I want, like on the spot immediately, with ability to scale up and scale down, just without any ability to know. I don't need to contact my account manager for doing that. I want to consume it like I'm consuming the regular public.
Just like you do in any other cloud.
Yes,
Right? Ed, on your side?
Yeah, for me it's, so we've been dealing with AirWatch before VMware acquired them. We're dealing with vLoad Cloud before VMware acquired them. And really for us it's, I've not seen any evidence yet, but it's more of a kind of, I don't want to lose the essence and culture that those smaller companies bring. Absolutely.
While we bring scale to it, don't lose the innovation of startups. Very
so it's
key,
more the partnership,
the way in which
customer
we
success
integrate startups. Acquisitions. Fran, on your side.
I'd say very simply, help us to be less different. I think, while you're differentiating in your portfolio, we're trying to, and one of the questions we ask ourselves in Vodafone and making technology choices is, what's the rest of the world doing? If we're making a telco-specific choice, we have to ask ourselves why. And I think, helping us move and transition and align towards the rest of the world as we go towards cloud, where the responsibility for resiliency, for example, moves to the software and less about the hardware. There's things that you can do there, I think, that will really transform what we're doing.
That's great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking your time to be with us. Very inspirational. Give it up, folks, for Fran, Erez,
Sanjay,
and Ed. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you. So if I were to summarize what you heard there, in essence was, listen, agility across the board. People want us to move fast. They want software to be able to move fast in any of these environments, whether it's a traditional Vodafone to a more modern sort of Playtika. They're looking for the type of innovation that can move really fast and also ensure that as they do this, VMware scales with them. And you heard in many of these places, there's a blend of software abstraction in any of these clouds. So hopefully those are applicable to all of you in any industry that you're in. The top part of that same diagram that I talked about is where we want to go to next, which is the data center moved cloud, and now how does the world of the desktop move mobile into the edge? Okay? And I think that that's also very profound, because if you think about the 7 billion people that are in the world, maybe 1 billion of them are working, maybe 2 billion of them are working for some company or the other today, and every one of them has a phone. Okay? In some countries, people are getting to the internet now directly on the phone and not through a laptop. Many of those billion people have a laptop and a phone. And that landscape today, what we would call a fleet of devices, of end-user computing devices, are in one of these three forms of operating systems. They're Apple, Google, Microsoft. When I did my first keynote here 5 years ago, I asked people how many people had iPhones, how many people had Android phones, and then, I'd ask how many people had a Windows phone and BlackBerry, and one person raised their hand, and I said, I'd pray for them. Okay? But that world has changed. I'm not going to do that survey now again. But nonetheless, today, all of you probably have an Apple iPhone or an Android phone, and you have a laptop that's either Windows 10 or Mac. And Windows 10, thanks to Microsoft, they've actually gotten better. So this world has now become one where the heterogeneous landscape of laptop, tablet, and phone has to be managed and secured by a Switzerland vendor. That's not tied to one or the other. It's very hard for Microsoft to manage Apple devices or Apple to Apple Google devices. They just don't build core integration and engineering together. That's what we've done. And what we've also done is taken together very disparate spaces. This industry has always been amazing to me because it's VDI and MDM and IDM and just a whole alphabet soup of acronyms. And what we've created is a mountain of morass. No offense to any of these vendors, they're all very good. And then a whole bunch of labor to pull it together that costs you probably of the order of 44 euros per month to integrate. And we want to make this at least 70% cheaper with Workspace ONE. That's the economic impact that we're trying to create in the end user landscape. And what do we do as we did this? And there's some lessons that I would share with you as we did this, both from the engineering perspective and working with you. It starts with the way in which you bring together two very simple concepts of simplicity and security. When you go on your life's journey, you don't lug around 3,000 CDs for music. Music comes to you on iPod and iPhone and iTunes. That's simplicity. Why do you have all this experience that's so complex in the world? We've got to learn a lesson or two, the enterprise companies from consumer companies, in making things simple. Vice versa, the consumer companies now are starting to learn a lot about security. See what's happened to Facebook this year. When we can bring these two together, there's absolute magic in consumer simplicity and enterprise security. We took this to heart, and we put all of our product managers and our end-user computing team, and actually now many parts of VMware, through the Stanford Design School. Okay? And it brings together some very simple principles of viability, desirability, and feasibility, where you could bring together business people and technology and train your product managers to think in the mind of a consumer or customer. And it's amazing what results in terms of design-centric thinking. It's a very applicable concept. I'm not making a plug here for specifically the Stanford Design School, but many of these design school principles here in Europe also. What's resulted is similar to that description I showed to you, networking. Nobody would have thought of VMware in the networking space, okay, 20 years ago, or even 5, 10 years ago. Nobody would have thought about VMware in the mobility space. And here we are, thanks to every one of you. And, you know, I think 60, 70,000 customers in end-user computing. We've stayed number one the last 4 or 5 years and plan to stay that way. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome on stage our next panel. And join me in welcoming Eileen Jessup, Andrew Plunkett, and Farjah Lamrabet. Thank you. Give them a hand. Thank you. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you for being here. Great. Well, this is fantastic. It's clearly a passion of mine, end-user computing, since I was involved in that business. But you all have very incredible stories in terms of what each of your companies are doing. Eileen, I thought I'd start with you because my mom's a doctor, and anytime I talk to someone in the medical profession, it's amazing. You know, we think we're doing something special in software, but then here you are helping either save people's lives or impact people's lives. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Christie, part of NHS, and you're focused on cancer research, and how you're using software to change the workplace there. That would be good to start with there.
Okay, a bit of background on the Christie. It's a Manchester-based organisation. It supports 3.1 million patients regionally, but it also treats patients, international patients. It's world-leading single-site cancer centre. It's one of the largest in Europe. And it's an extremely exciting place to work with. We've probably about 500 live trials going on at any one time. We have an ambition to increase that over the next few years with some of the initiatives that are underway at the moment. But from an IT point of view, we've got to get a more streamlined service within the hospital, and that's where my role is really quite fulfilling in doing that. So we've got loads of opportunities around improving our outpatient service, where VMware is going to really help do that. And I can go into a bit more detail on that.
Great.
So we most patients who come to the Christie have complex cancers, and so they've already had a diagnosis in another organisation. And when they come to the Christie, for any one visit, they may see 4 or 5 different people in 4 or 5 different clinics. And we are, at the moment, developing a solution that will start to streamline those patients when they come into hospital. They will know where their first stop-off is, which clinic, and from that clinic, they will then get routed to the next. And the staff will always know where the patient is, and the patient will always know where they're going. So their journey is much, much better organised. And for the clinicians, we've got to make their workspace work much better for them. So they access many disparate systems, and it's a nightmare for them. So it slows the process down. We can have patients waiting in our outpatients department for up to 2 hours, which is, you know, for such poorly patients, it's not a great experience. And we've got a huge ambition at the Christie to really make that patient experience a good one, coupled with the high quality of care. So for our clinical community, we are looking at building out Horizon View for session persistence, single sign-on, and hopefully speed up that process over the next few months.
And then you've got AirWatch for your mobile devices. So Horizon on the virtual desktop side with you, and then AirWatch for mobile device.
Yeah,
Great.
so we've got a huge increase in the things that we are hooking up to our electronic patient record, and that's only going to increase over the next few years. So our AirWatch deployment is going to be much, much bigger over this next 2 years.
Very great, and it's similar to what we hear at many other hospitals. Healthcare have been some of the first pioneers of that any app, any device type of story. Andrew, everybody knows about Airbus. It's a sort of a household name. We either fly on that plane or an alternative plane. Before we get into your story, is there ever going to be an Airbus that can fly me directly from San Francisco to Bangalore?
Absolutely.
Soon?
Very soon. So
okay,
we've got our
great.
first flight now in New York to Singapore.
There's a lot of folks who take that flight to, if I could put a small request in for the speed up of that what is it going to be, 3 something. But tell us a little bit about the Workplace. What I've been amazed about your story is the way in which this large organization, 100,000 odd employees, has made some bold moves in the way you're thinking about modern technology and modernizing the workplace. Talk a little bit about your vision there and what you've been doing in the workplace and how VMware fits there.
Yeah, so I joined Airbus at the end of May to take on the lead for digital workplace, and really what I've joined is a company probably going through its biggest rate of change in its history. I mean, it's common to many other organizations. We've got digital transformation happening in our manufacturing processes. We've got the threat of digital disruption coming from outside. You only have to look at SpaceX to say, well, they're completely transforming the way we launch satellites into space. Airbus has made a significant number of investments in sort of the digital space, and I guess we've had a lot of good success in that. But one of the key things, and if you think about our goal as an organization, whether it's our helicopters division, defense and space, or our commercial division, is really to optimize and accelerate the way we design, build, and then service planes sort of after we've sold them to customers. But with all those investments, and you think about the complexity of our, the operating environment we have. So, we have something like 5,000 external suppliers. Our aircraft run into the millions of parts. And trying to do something in that sort of environment, thinking about the people is where you really have to focus on collaboration. There's been a really active decision by Airbus management to focus on enhancing the workplace capability. So we've obviously made investments in Google, and then significantly with VMware as well. I mean, it was only 2017 where we were still running an entire BlackBerry estate, and we've used Workspace ONE within a year to actually sort of migrate 50,000 people almost from BlackBerry.
You've got 100,000 odd employees. They've got laptops, Windows, and probably Mac. Yep. Is that right? And then you've got a fleet of mobile devices in the tens of thousands, 50, 60,000 iOS, Android. So this is a very disparate, heterogeneous landscape.
That's correct.
And you're also looking at Chromebooks, I understand.
Starting to look at Chromebooks, also looking at MacBooks probably more seriously as well. Yeah. From our perspective, our company builds airplanes, they build rockets, and they build helicopters. And we need to be providing the tools to make those people's jobs as easy as possible. So we have to offer that flexibility and capability, and I think that's a really big drive in that. Obviously, we've also invested recently in Google as well for our G Suite. So. Yeah,
I want to come back to it because it's phenomenal. The use of G Suite in that. Virtual desktops for many of the 3D types of modeling types of use cases, VDI, and then also mobile devices for the any app, any use case. Farja, maybe we can move to you. What I love about your story, no one would have thought that, everyone's seen the Louvre in Paris, okay? That's a 100-year plus museum, thousands of arts, just absolutely famous. But there's a Louvre in Abu Dhabi, and it's the 1-year anniversary.
Exactly.
Your use case, which I want to get to in a second, but tell us a little bit, your 1-year anniversary, and you have some special announcement that came out today.
Yeah, exactly. So Louvre Abu Dhabi, in fact, a very iconic building, a cultural beacon environment. It's a universal museum that opened 1 year ago. We are today celebrating our first year anniversary. And we are really happy to announce that we have reached more than 1 million visitors in 1 year.
Wow, 1 million visitors in 1 year. Can we give her a hand? That's amazing. Okay. I bet it took the Louvre in Paris many years to get to 1 million.
So
maybe a little easier in the Middle East with a lot of tourists and so on coming in. But what's so fascinating about your use case was wasn't just your use of Workspace ONE for employees. The bulk of your people who come in are, using iPads in the museum, and you've got all of them secured with Workspace ONE. So this was a consumer use case.
Exactly. So basically, we have built the Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum from scratch. So from the base building, the physical architecture, the network, the business application on top of all those layers. And we were really aiming to bring a lot of innovative technologies and mobile, flexible, and digital features. It's quite complex in a museum environment to bring all that tool, because museums are quite classic in their way of exhibiting the artworks and providing museography to the visitors. The region of UAE is quite exceptional because people are really connected, very mobile oriented. So we are really aiming to allow a very, very specific and unique journey for every visitor, customize the visitor journey for each individual by bringing iPads, virtual reality, augmented reality. We are really aiming to reach and enrich the visitor's experience throughout.
It's all about that visitor experience.
Exactly.
And the iPad makes it extremely, you can bring virtual reality and a variety of other things to give them the full experience about the wonderful art there. Andrew, I want to come back to you because most people have been used to using, the traditional Windows laptop, Office, Exchange, and so on and so forth. You guys made some bold changes. You're obviously welcoming Macs. You've got obviously Windows real estate, but you're also bet big on G Suite. Tell us a little bit about why the Google context and how Workspace ONE integration with Google is important to you.
So I guess one of the key drivers in that collaboration, empowering our employees, better sharing of information, which is a key tenet of our strategy going forward. So it led to the decision. Obviously, we were looking at, we had on-prem solutions. We were looking at both Office 365 and Google. And we evaluated over, I think it was the best part of a year, the two products alongside each other. And sort of what we got to, and I've used 365 and Google for years, and both very good products. But I think the decision for Airbus was really, as well as the assessment sort of coming out overwhelmingly in favor of sort of the Google product for Airbus, it was really also the opportunity for driving change and transformation in the organization. So it's a product that does things differently. It has a lot of common features, but it does things differently as well. So for us, it was as much a vehicle for driving sort of transformation of our organization, or supporting, and getting people to sort of look at how they've been doing things for years, and actually using that as a bit of a vehicle to say, is there a way of doing this differently? So, from a Workspace ONE perspective, we're already using Workspace ONE in terms of the deployment of the application. So when people are enrolled onto Google, the applications automatically drop onto their phone, and it's been a really seamless process in many cases. A bit of testing up front, but we've got it now working really well. So big credit to the team for that. But, I think going forward, the importance of your tools for us is going to be huge. We need to, while we might have a complex estate, we need to make that thing very simple to our end users. As I said before, it's really about focusing on the job they're trying to do.
Eileen, maybe we could also end with your example before I ask the last question very quickly to all of you. You have a vision for where the outpatient experience is going to go. What was that going to, because all of us go to a hospital, we're frustrated the amount of time we've got to wait there. How is mobility and that workplace transformation for employees and clinicians, what's your vision of how that's going to influence the outpatient experience too?
So I think the first interactions our patients will have with our new outpatient service will be via the computers we supply and the information boards. I think the next stage will be an app to a patient's device, whether they choose to take one when they enter the Christie or they use their own, that tells them where they are in their journey, gives them some subset of their record and what's going to happen next to them in the journey, and at the end of their trip to the Christie, what's going to happen next, what's the next stage for them. And I think the better we make that experience, the better I think we can start to see outcomes for cancer.
Yep. And I think that mobile app, there'll be app for everything secured by Workspace ONE. Maybe very quickly to each of you, are there any areas, I asked the same panel, the previous panel, any areas you feel VMware can improve? Anyone want to go first? All right, you're eager to raise your hand, Eileen. You go first.
I think, I suppose with any vendor is come in and see us, come in and feel our pain, and come and get closer to understanding the way we work and how to improve that.
Understand your business and sit there with you.
Absolutely.
Andrew or Fajr?
Yes, my request would be different. So my point is, if we can succeed to bring all these people, your audience, your partners, vendors, clients, partners, bring them to Abu Dhabi to visit the Louvre.
All right, the next VMworld, JP, we got to do in Abu Dhabi. All right, that's a simple request. It's a little easier than software. Andrew, on your side?
Look, for me, I mean, we're using VDI extensively. We're using Workspace ONE extensively. They're great products, but I feel we're only tapping the surface of what they're capable of, and I think it's actually helping us to unlock the sort of full range of capabilities of the products. I think, for me, that would be something I'd really want to see more of.
And you've pushed us very hard on the integration of Workspace ONE with Google at your scale, 100,000. So thank you for that. And all of this is very helpful. Eileen, Andrew, and Fajr, let's give it up for our panelists. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for being here. And so what you heard in that panel was, in essence, how they're trying to transform their workplace. And not just the workplace, but how they transform the consumer experience, because the consumer is going to come in with mobile devices. And what we're seeking to do is, just as Eileen pointed out at the very end, is to understand your industry. The more that infrastructure companies like us could become vertical specific to the healthcare industry, through the consumer products industry, through banks, and actually in the digital workspace, where we have one of the easiest ways to start thinking just like those businesses. So as I summarize, this picture kind of orients everything we're trying to get done, right? The data center, making it with software look like the cloud. Help you in that journey to the hybrid cloud, whether it's a public cloud, multi-cloud. And then in the world of the workplace, ensure that you have all of this ability to work at the speed of life, so you can pick up any app on any device. And that entire world will also help you move to the edge. So that's just a summary of the bigger picture you saw from Pat yesterday, okay, of this world of any cloud, whether it's IT, whether it's the hybrid cloud, going public cloud, or the telco cloud, or the edge cloud. The world of any app, not just the traditional apps, SaaS apps, but also cloud native, and of course the world of devices. We think that this is a tremendous opportunity for us to be innovating up and down this picture for years to come. I think we first shared this picture 5 years ago, and I think we could be doing this for the next 5, 10 years easily, because there's so much to get done up and down the stack. And we could not do this without you. So let me finish my part of the keynote with say that, listen, what you heard here from every one of these 6 stories could be each of you. In fact, you've got a story to tell. We want to hear about it and put you on stage. Possibility begins with you. Thank you very much. And to now take on the next part of the agenda, please welcome on stage our fabulous CMO, Robin Matlock. Robin? All the best. Show is all yours. Take care.
Thank you, Sanjay. Well, thank you, Sanjay. What a wonderful session with our customers. You know, we've talked a lot, both yesterday and today, about the tech industry. Where it is today, where is it going, and how are we going to help shape that future? And as you heard, it's VMware's 20th anniversary. And in a lot of ways, that celebration of 20 years gives us the opportunity to look back. But it also creates this curiosity and wonder to look ahead. What will be 20 years into our future? What challenges and problems and obstacles are we going to face? And how are we going to channel all of our innovation to shape the most positive future possible? When I look out into this audience and see the incredible talent that is gathered here, from leading technologists to leaders of business, representing every segment of industry, financial services, healthcare, education, I am simply in awe of the power and the influence that we have as a community of people. We're the ones that are building the very fabric and infrastructure for the organizations and companies that we serve. But for me, this brings up a very interesting question, and frankly, a complex one. How do we use the power of technology responsibly, truly for a force for good? How do we use our collective talents, the talents that are in this room, in this industry, right now, to ensure that we have a better future for everyone? Not just the insiders, not just those of us in the industry that have access to all kinds of technology, but truly for everyone. It's a big question. Now, to help us really dive into this topic and explore it further, I'm thrilled to welcome a very influential businesswoman, philanthropist, and public servant. She's a veteran entrepreneur of the dot-com era. In fact, she started her own company, a travel and leisure site, lastminute.com, at the very early age of 25. She has spent much of her career as an advocate for digital access and security. She's a member of the UK House of Lords. She's an acting executive chair at .Everyone, which is an organization that is dedicated to championing responsible technology for a fairer future. She currently sits on several boards, including Twitter. She's the definition of a Renaissance woman, and she's also just an absolute delight. Please help and join me in a very warm welcome for the very own Miss Martha Lane Fox.
Thank you so much, Martha.
Thank you, Martha. It is just so lovely to have you with us this morning. I'm just absolutely delighted. Now, you and I are going to get a few minutes here to chat, but before we do that, you have such an interesting story, such big ideas about where this industry needs to go to help the world be a better place. I would love to just let you have a few minutes, and I'll be back and we'll have a chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. Thank you, Robin. Hola, good morning. It's great to be here. I don't think that you imagined that you would start your day today looking at an extinct species. But I can tell you that you have got this real chance to see close up a live dinosaur. I was walking down the street the other day and a relatively young person came up to me and said, "I know who you are." And I thought, oh, great, I'm famous again, because for a short period of time in my early life, our company was very famous. They looked at me and they said, "Yeah, you're that dot-com dinosaur, aren't you?" And I thought, well, I'm 45, not 45 million years old. But, you know, I can't really disagree with them, because I've had this very long and strange experience of technology. As Robin said, an amazing experience, age 25, back in the late 90s, starting a dot-com business at a time when the world felt so very different. I'm sure many of you here remember it. You know, I was an excitable young woman who felt as though this incredible promise of technology was going to change everything, that there were going to be businesses started all over the world, that it was going to lead to a democratic reawakening, that it was going to redistribute a whole load of incredible opportunities and resources. And to a degree, that's happened. But I'd like to talk to you a bit about how I see that journey, how I feel things have changed in the last 20 years, but more importantly, the action and the things we can do to make sure that the next 20 years not only are brilliant for our industry and everyone here in this room, but also help us solve the biggest challenges that we face. You know, back when we started lastminute.com 1998, the things that felt important and the things that we were doing were really quite simple, actually. We were trying to encourage more people to live their dreams at unbeatable prices, a strapline I wrote at about midnight when I was really struggling with what our kind of branding should be. The unintended consequences of the things that we were building didn't feel quite as significant as some of the unintended consequences that we now see the sector has faced. I was trying to think about kind of the story that best illustrates that, and I thought, oh, you're probably a friendly crowd. You won't mind if I tell you a somewhat indiscreet story. So Brent, my co-founder, was always fantastic at challenging us to copy whatever was happening on US technology websites. You know, we were in Europe, we were kind of at the vanguard of building electronic commerce here in the UK, convincing people to put their credit cards into the internet. But we didn't really have the same technological edge as many US companies. So when Amazon did something, Brent would email me at any time of the day or night saying, why haven't we got this? Why aren't we doing that? And one of the things the features that we embedded was the fast buy function. One click and all of your details get put into the same category as the time that you used the website before. It was quite hard to get right. We did it. We put it live. About 2 weeks after it went live, my head of customer services, Justin, came and stood by my desk and said, OK, clever clogs, you think you're so good at customer service. You deal with this customer. I thought, no problem, I can definitely deal with this. Got the phone. 10 minutes of a screaming man. And I couldn't work out what on earth had gone wrong. The fast buy function. Because, of course, it's brilliant when you're going on holiday with the same person that you were going on holiday with the first time you used the website. It was slightly less good to be using it when maybe you weren't going with your wife on the long break you had with your kids. Maybe you were going on a mini break with someone that wasn't your wife, and maybe the tickets had been sent to your home. Pretty bad. But I think we can agree, although on a personal level that must have been quite devastating, on a sort of geopolitical level it wasn't actually that bad. So the unintended consequences in the late 90s didn't feel quite as profound as maybe they do now. Now, just to share my own personal story with you a bit, I left lastminute.com. We'd been through the IPO. We'd seen the first .com crash. I sometimes say I'm one of the first people to have survived a virtual crash in the stock markets and then a real-world crash in real life. I left the company. I fell out of a car. I broke 28 bones. I spent 2 years in hospital. And my life changed forever, particularly my working life, because I had to reorganize what I do and my portfolio of interests. And I share that with you, not because I want sympathy, perhaps to explain a little bit about my leopard print stick, but mainly because it did make me think about what I wanted to do with the rest of my working life in a different way. I think it forced me to reassess and prioritize in a different way. And that's why, for the second half of my career, I've tried to focus on how to make sure that technology impacts the maximum number of people in the most responsible and meaningful way. And I got this incredible opportunity to explore this more when I was asked to become the digital champion for the UK. I first worked for Gordon Brown and then for David Cameron. Now, I'd worked in technology my whole life. I had no real kind of thought about some of the people that had been left behind by our amazing revolution. And yet now I'd been asked to look at how to make sure that technology was being used for the maximum number of people and how to make sure that everyone in the UK was brought in on this incredible empowerment and incredible tool that we had used to such advantage at lastminute.com. Now, back then, this was nearly 10 years ago, there were about 15 million adults in the UK who'd never been online, about 20% of the population. You might think, well, why does that matter? And sometimes it's easy to forget that half the world doesn't use this technology. But I look at it a different way. Imagine when we are all able to connect and when we really have embedded digital skills and digital understanding at all levels of society. Now, this was brought home to me particularly importantly when I went to visit a city in the north of the UK called Leeds. It was a very, very rainy day. I'll never forget it. I thought, well, what am I doing? How can I have rebuilt my life so that I have to trawl around on trains that are late to really random places to go to community centres to talk to people about how they use technology? And then I met this young man who looked at me and said, I would be dead without the internet. And I thought, really? You know, that feels like quite an extreme statement. I can imagine you might be dead because of a whole bunch of reasons, not because you had never used the internet. And then he told me his story. He'd been found in Leeds, smacked out of his head on drugs in a bus shelter, unable to do anything. He'd been taken to somewhere to dry out, to get back his life in order a little bit. And after a few weeks or months of having had, you know, his recovery, someone said to him, you really have to start thinking about what skills you need. This was a young man who'd been in a care his whole life and so on. And he went to a drop-in centre that was helping people learn how to start businesses. But what they were actually doing was showing people the tools of the modern age. And this young man realized he had a very good sense of music, and he started to make music, and he started to sell music, and he started to get gigs doing DJing in local places. And he was earning, not a lot, but enough to make him feel as though this was something he could build on, and this was something he could use every day. And he said to me, you know, without this, without the internet, without that connection into other people, without that ability to make a small amount of money, to feel that dignity that I now feel, there is no question in my mind that I would be back taking drugs and I would probably be dead. And when I'm thinking, oh, this work is boring, no one's really interested, no one cares really about making sure that the most vulnerable people are using technology, I think about this young man, and he sits on my shoulder, and it's incredibly powerful and motivating in order to keep going. So I worked for quite some time trying to help more people in the UK use the internet. And then I started to think about how services that government delivers affect some of these most vulnerable groups. Because we have this funny thing where the people that use government most kind of get the most shitty services. It's not really very fair. They're certainly not, they weren't the most digital services in the UK. They weren't the ones that all of us here would recognize as being best of class, efficient, you know, digital by default, user-friendly, agile in design, all of those things. Government is very far away from that. So I started getting involved in digital government, and I set up a team in the centre of government called the Government Digital Service, and we created something called gov.uk. It's a model that's now been used all over the world. Very simple thing. My message was simple: put users first. Not that complicated, right? All of you in your businesses, I'm sure, say that all the time. But this felt like a big shift in government, because in government, people who write policy have often quite stayed in their own rooms and never actually talked to the person that that policy affects. When we reimagined the driving licence in the UK, we got all the people who make policy around driving to talk to people that use driving licences, all of us really. They were somewhat stunned, somewhat shocked to be in the same room as the people that used their policy and used their services. Now, why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this because I still feel as though we haven't begun to scratch the surface of the power of what we can do with this technology. As I said, I'm 45. Maybe I'm having a midlife crisis, but I think the internet is having one as well. There are some dark forces that certainly I never imagined when we were starting off our business back in the late 90s. We face massive challenges around cybersecurity. We face massive challenges that the value systems of people who are building very, very important and huge bits of the internet are very different to what I would call our kind of liberal values in the West. We had never imagined that there would be warfare conducted in these dark places on the internet, that countries without the resources that our liberal Western democracies have would use technology to such an extreme advantage. This is complicated issues. I never imagined that we would also have such a lack of diversity in our sector, and that some of the voices that felt that were going to emerge and that were going to be included have fundamentally still been excluded. So we do need to get a grip on the next 10, 20 years, because we have so much that we can still do. I'm in the UK now trying to build a movement for responsible technology, to try and encourage the use of technology at all levels of society to solve the problems that matter, rather than just deploying the technology. To lead with the humans, not to lead with the technology. There are a bunch of different things we're doing, but fundamentally what I think we need to do is raise levels of digital understanding at all levels of society. You know, it's actually quite easy to help people use the internet, to get that checklist of basic digital skills, as I said, to help more people like those young people in Leeds, that young man in Leeds who've never used the internet. Can you send an email? Can you buy something safely online? Can you use your own passwords and so on? You can do that checklist. Much more difficult to get this nuanced and slightly ambiguous idea of digital understanding. What does that mean? What I think it means is creating resilience for the digital age. And this is something I think is a huge prize for the organization or the country that puts it at the heart of its strategy. When I sit in the House of Lords, as you can imagine, there are a whole spectrum of things that happen when you get 800 people who are all very different backgrounds. But fundamentally, there is a big disconnection between the pace of technological change outside the building and the pace of policymaking and legislation in the building. I think it's absolutely vital that we join these two up, whatever country you're in, because unless we do, we won't make the best decisions about public spending, about healthcare, about all of the things that matter. It's an immensely big challenge. We did some research in the UK that showed that while 50% of individuals felt that every day the internet was helping them, of course, cheap clothing, connecting with friends, searching for information, using Uber, whatever it might be. But only 12% felt as though the internet had been good for society. Only 12%. Now, I'm sure it would be interesting to do the research in all of the countries you come from. But that, to me, that's the fundamental challenge. That big disconnection between, I know I've been helped by it, but I don't actually think it's doing good for the world. Because the danger is if people lose trust in technology, if they don't want to be part of the modern world, then we're going to have some real complexities and inequalities, and we're going to see even more of some of the scarier and malign forces, I believe, that we've seen rise up in the world over the last 5-10 years. If I look at what's happening in my own country, you can map pretty much exactly people who use technology with people who voted to remain in the EU and people who were disconnected from the internet and voted to leave. Now, it's a clunky example, it's not exact correlation, but there is something about physical disconnection and feeling disconnected. There's something that we're all feeling a bit nervous and ambiguous about. So we need to put a different set of values at the core of how we build technology in the future. We need to make sure the human is always at the heart of how we build things. Everyone, the organisation that Robin mentioned, is a small charity that I started building a movement for responsible technology, an internet that works for everyone. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. We did a project around end-of-life care, because I'm basically nuts and I wanted to pick the most complicated and difficult and emotional subject I could. I said, let's get involved in the NHS, and let's get involved in the NHS at the point at which people are dying. And my team looked at me and thought, what are you talking about? That is not when people need to be worrying about technology. But that's sort of the point. If you can design services at the most difficult point of need for people in the most need, and you can show that technology can be a facilitator rather than a headache, that surely is what we should be using technology for. And guess what? When you're dying, it's a bloody nightmare on many levels. You've got hundreds of people in your care, in your orbit. We worked out that on average you have about 40 people in your care in the last 6 months of your life. That might be people in your family or close network, but it might be a physio, a kidney specialist, a specialist doctor, people in the hospice, people who come to your home. And they all have different information systems, and they're all telling you different things. So we built a very simple collaborative healthcare record, just like a note-based product, that meant that people could take control of all these different bits of input information. We talked to lots of people who are in the last bits of their life, and we built something very, very quickly. Now, that's not a product that we actually have scaled into the system, but the idea was to show that when you start from a different place, you start talking to the users about their real need, even at the point in their lives which is arguably one of the most important and difficult to navigate. You can use technology to create something empowering and brilliant, something that takes a little bit of the pain and the headache away from the things that people are feeling. So I believe we need to put this kind of thinking much more at the heart of how we build systems. I think the technology sector is an extraordinary and incredible place, but I don't yet think that we've addressed the challenges that we face as humans in the way that we need to. I couldn't stand up here in front of all of you and not also talk about diversity and why I believe that is also part of this responsible technology movement. You know, I mentioned I sit in the House of Lords, an 1,000-year-old institution. It has a higher percentage of women than the technology sector, than the internet technology sector, which didn't exist 30 years ago. Why does this matter? Well, I think it matters for many reasons. It matters because about power and hierarchy and money and value, but it also matters because it doesn't make any business sense. To give you one example, Apple, when it released its Health Kit, I think it was in late 2015, maybe early 2016, big product launch, they'd had hundreds of people working on it, very, very, very well received, apart from half the population. Because guess what? This health kit, which was meant to measure all of the bits of your life, your walk, your health, heart rate, all of these things, had absolutely nothing to do with female health. Nothing. Nothing to do with babies, nothing to do with periods, nothing to do with the menopause. So Apple had to recall the product, redesign it, start again. Incredibly expensive and just stupid. Why was that? Well, partly because there was not one single woman on the development team. That's not good business sense. Similarly, when I went to join the board of Twitter, I thought, how can it be that Twitter has this terrible abuse problem that at that point in 2016 it was really profoundly bad, and in Europe people were, why do you want to join the board of this company that is supporting all of these negative conversations in the world? Well, you know, I think Jack wouldn't mind me saying that when 4 youngish white men design a product, they're not building it for the worldview that they see. They've never walked down the street and been shouted at. They've never felt nervous as they've walked down to get back to their house with their key in their hand thinking, is someone going to jump on me? And yet I think pretty much every woman in this audience would recognize that experience. And probably if they had been involved in the design process right at the beginning, would have designed for safety in a different way. And I'm happy to say Twitter is shifting and changing. But, you know, these really matter. It really matters because of product decisions and because of the moral compass that I think we all need to make sure we live by. So I am determined to help try and make sure that the next 10, 20 years does really feel different to maybe the last 10 years in tech. I can't bear it when I hear this tech bashing. Technology offers the most incredible solutions to the world, and the internet specifically, and there is so much more to be done. We really haven't even scratched the surface yet. We must make sure that everybody is connected to this incredible empowering technology. Half the world still isn't. There are so many more stories like that young man in Leeds. When I hear politicians say, oh, we have 90% broadband coverage or 95% broadband coverage, well, what about the 5%? We must strive to make sure this is something that increases equality, doesn't increase inequality. We also must make sure that the governments and the services that we're delivering at scale for all of our citizens are services for the modern age. We must make sure that our legislators and our policymakers understand this stuff, because otherwise we won't be making the best decisions that we could. And as individuals, I urge everyone to be curious about this technology and to encourage debate and conversation about its use. This is how we'll build resilience. This is how we're going to crack the biggest challenges over the next 10 years. I've been somewhat dispirited by the lack of conversation, not here, but generally, about the climate crisis and the IPCC report that came out a month ago. We have 12 years, guys. We have 12 years to reverse some of this stuff. How are we going to do that if we don't put technology and innovation at the heart of thinking about this enormous, enormous threat to humanity? I am not an alarmist. I'm an optimist. I think we can do this, but I think we have to re-engineer ourselves slightly. I think we have to focus on the things that matter. We have to ask about the context we're building things in and the consequences of what we're building. And I think we have to do it really fast. So let's go. Please join me on this journey to build a movement for responsible technology. Please help me to ask the questions about how we're going to really make sure innovation solves the right problems over the next 10 to 20 years. I can feel that we're all ready to get going. So I'm going to shut up. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the questions.
Martha, you are just a bundle of energy and incredibly passionate and so much vision and ideas. So let's dive in. I just have to unpack much of what we just talked about. Let's take the audience back a little bit on a journey. First of all, you just have this huge platform, big ideas, and you're, everything from public policy to private sector. But I want to go back to the Martha, the little girl Martha. Like, were you born this way? Did you always think you were going to change the world? And how did this kind of fire start?
It's really hard, isn't it, to analyze yourself with stuff like that. I guess I'm lucky. I came from a background where I can honestly say my parents would have been more distraught if I'd gone into banking or accounting or become a lawyer than become an entrepreneur.
Fine occupations, by the way.
Yes, exactly. That's not a disrespectful comment. It's just my particular background. You know, my dad was an academic, a historian. We always talked about ideas at home. My mum ran her own small charity, so I think it was partly percolating from all of that, and I just always wanted to contribute and feel as though what I was doing had a consequence in the world that was meaningful.
And you talked about, you know, kind of a turning point for you, and you mentioned the accident a little bit, but take us back to this time and what really became a trigger and an inspiration for you to really start on a very different, you know, kind of trajectory. Can you just, what was going on for you at that time, and why, you know, what really made this become the torch for you, particularly technology?
Well, I think a couple of things, you know. Firstly, it sounds kind of obvious, but when you spend 2 years in hospital, you are actually disconnected. You know, I was unable to move pretty much for the first 3 months. I was flat on my back. I had all this metal and all this stuff. And all I could do was send text messages with one finger to my friends, which when you've had a lot of morphine is not necessarily a good idea. So they get this total garbled stuff that meant absolutely nothing. But I think what that period of time made me realize was what it was like to be actually disconnected from things. So I'm sure that was
became very personal for you at that point.
But also, because I like solving problems, I would look at the way the systems were working around me, and I could see nurses and doctors working without, you know, the tools that the people in this room are deploying every day. And, you know, I was lucky. I was in some of the best healthcare places in the UK with some of the most extraordinary people working around me, but still they were struggling with Wi-Fi, with database systems, you know, with stuff to make their life better and easier. And even though that was 15 years ago now, I don't believe it has significantly changed. I really don't. So I think from both angles, I thought, hold on a minute. There is a whole other world that isn't about the lastminute.com excitement and vanguard of e-commerce. It's about how we deliver benefit to people who are actually working on the front line in services.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive in a little bit more to this concept of responsible technology. And maybe because this audience is particularly focused in IT, that's our segment of the technology sector, but help us first of all kind of delineate, you know, when you think of these messages, the message to IT versus the technology sector as a whole, let's start there. I want to go into some more.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You know, there's things I believe we can all do at a personal level, just in our daily lives. There's things that you can do in your professional life, and then there's things that we need to be worrying about as citizens, I think. And so I believe so deeply that whatever bit of the technology sector you're working in, whether you're, you know, working in databases, whether you're working in cloud software, whether you're working in any of the innovations that we've heard about over the last 2 days here, it's important to ask about the context of what you're doing and building and the consequences of what that might be.
Let's pull that thread a bit. Context. Give me a little bit more color on that.
What I mean by that is, I don't think anybody should be shy of asking, what is this for? What is this product going to be used for? How is it going to be deployed? Who is it going to touch? You know, have we thought about the people that are going to be affected by this, both positively and negatively? Do we think it's going to deepen existing inequalities, or do we think it's going to shrink them? You know, and I think that might sound an absurd thing to say about certain bits of IT, but I would argue every bit of IT is as important as every other bit in the chain, because that's how we build our systems, is by being conscious of where their next, the kind of interlocking bits all affect each other.
I wonder if, you know, I'm sure that as we're building things, we're asking some of those questions, but are we really asking with the broadest net? Yeah. Are we really asking and getting the kind of unexpected answers? And what's your thought on that? Because I'm sure people ask requirements documents and they kind of frame a set of expectations.
Well, I think that sometimes is the case, isn't it? That you sort of just proceed with these, you know, set frameworks without maybe challenging them enough. You know, to give you an example, as people may be aware, we had a big attack on our NHS software recently. It was through WannaCry and so on, and luckily no one was actually at risk of dying because of the attack, but it turns out it happened because about 70 different points in the system, people had not just upgraded their software. And so, you know, everyone was following the checkboxes, but nobody had actually stood back and thought, have we actually done the right things to protect this system? And I think that those are the really important things that we have to make sure that we're doing. We have to be conscious of the negative and proceed trying to double down on the positive. And we talk at Everyone about 3 C's. We talk about context, contribution, and continuity. And I think they're quite good frameworks to have in your mind. So what's the context of this? How's it going to be deployed? Who's going to be affected? The continuity. Are there people that are not going to be able to do what they've done in the past? And is that bad or good? And how are we going to help them to make sure that they're not displaced or just, out of the chain? And the contribution is about, do we understand what the transaction is that's going on here? Where's the value being created? Is it obvious whether it's going to one person or another person? And these are hard concepts, but I think rooting them, that's our framework, but trying to find those frameworks can be very helpful.
I want to go to that middle C and talk about, really the workforce and preparing the workforce. And there's kind of two dimensions. There's the up and coming workforce, and are we doing the right things to prepare our youth to enter the workforce and contribute and carry, many of these causes. And then also let's later then dive into maybe what we need to do with the existing workforce. So let's start with education. You're obviously involved in Open University, but what's your perception on how ready are our youth to dive in here?
This is where I begin to become a bit less optimistic. I would love to hear your stories, but if I look at the countries that I know a little bit, certainly the US and the UK and some bits of Europe, there are not. I think there need to be industrial strategies for skills and training. It should be as important as your telecoms infrastructure, your sort of human infrastructure, because the world is going to change so fast that all I believe we can really make sure we do is equip people to be able to ask the right questions, to be as curious about technology as possible, and to have that deep technical skill where they can build on what they might be able to do. So I think that very few governments have taken the issue of human training and skill as seriously as they have building the pipes or the clouds or whatever it might be, but I think that's what's needed.
So what are some of those gaps in particular that you think are...
If I just look parochially in the UK for a minute, we have 600,000 empty jobs in the tech sector right now, forecast to go to 1 million by 2020. So imagine that up across Europe and then, times the world. These are huge numbers, and yet we don't have a really consistent plan about how we're teaching young people both to fill those technical jobs or for people like me to make sure that we have as diverse audience of job for people for those jobs as possible. I studied ancient and modern history. I can't code. I used to keep a book of Java on my desk at lastminute.com so people wouldn't quite know whether I could understand what they were doing. It's quite an effective strategy. But it's so vital that we help young people to understand that this world is exciting and vibrant and that they can solve problems if they join it. And it's really important that we also make sure we have this diverse range of people and skills as symbols, because you don't have to be the coder and the software developer to play a big role. Look at us. We're both women who look slightly different to how people might imagine people in this industry. So I think we've got to be broad-ranging in how we present opportunities to young people.
And do we have access? I mean, do youth have equal access to education? And then once they're there, are they, that's your point about the content.
I think it's absolutely vital that we do. I don't believe it's happening at the minute inconsistently. To give an example, again, in the UK, we introduced into the curriculum at the age of 6 coding. So all young people theoretically are being taught to code. Now this, on one level, if you're the policymaker, looks amazing. Look at this tick. The UK is doing something forward-thinking and extraordinary. At the execution level, there is £5 million as the total pot to train all the teachers in the country about what coding is. I mean, this is absurd. And also, what are we teaching them? Is coding really the right thing? I mean, yes, that's very important, but are we going to alienate some kids? I just feel as though it's a perfect example of how the direction of travel looks right, but the execution and the detail is wrong, and we need to match those two things.
And what's your perception of the role of the private sector? Yeah, obviously... There's an army of volunteers here.
Well, this is fantastic. I know I've got at least 2,000 people signed up here. It's really important as well, I think, that organizations see this both interrelationship into how they can help build young people's skills and capacity, apprenticeships, programs, mentoring, I'm sure lots of the things that organizations here are doing. But also, if I was leading any bit of an organization now, I think you just have to have a different view of lifelong learning. You don't have a set of skills in the same way that you bring to a job and that's it, tick, you're going to be in that career. If you're my age, 45, I read recently that you'll change your career or your direction of travel about 11 times in your life. Still quite a lot, but it doesn't feel insane. If you're 20 years old right now, you'll have 22 different career pivots, changes in your life. 22. We've got to equip young people and we've got to equip organizations to be able to be flexible and to be able to navigate that changing landscape. So I think as leaders and as organizations, we also have a responsibility to make sure, are we still training people with the right skills? Are we encouraging people through organizations that a big part of what they need to do to deliver the organization is continue to learn?
What do you think when we think about retraining? And, what's the responsibility that we have as corporations to kind of deal with the workforce and the needs that are constantly changing? We have incredible pressures, shareholder, quarterly earnings, and where do you see?
Well, I think this is where you have to take a long-term view. Again, back to the fundamentals here. We have huge pressure on talent in all kinds of bits of different parts of the sector. It's hard to recruit, it's hard to find great people, so I think we're going to have to make these imaginative and creative leaps about where we find new talent. So that's about being bold in helping retrain people into our industry that might be outside it, but also our own people, and retraining them with different skills. To give you an example, there's an incredible woman in the UK called Dame Stephanie Shirley. She should be, in my opinion, on a statue in a square somewhere in London. In the 1960s, she came to the UK on the Kinder transport out of Nazi Germany, and she built a business in the late 1960s, all employing women, working on big, scary government contracts in the technology industry. And by the late 70s, she had thousands of women all working from home, doing projects like the Black Box for Concorde and the Polaris submarine, as she said, really easy, light touch, feminine kind of subjects. She was amazing, and I often think of her because if she was doing that in the 70s, 60s and 70s, women working from home on these kinds of projects, what are we doing? We are using so little of the talent that we could use. And I'm not just talking about gender. I'm talking about reaching into different communities to build capacity. Could be by socioeconomic group, by race, whatever it might be. But I think about her as inspiration because she had a different model of working in exactly the areas that we're talking about today. And yet we seem to have lost some of that creativity and imagination.
So let's pull that thread a bit and talk about diversity inclusion. 2 women on stage. You got to bring it up, everybody. So let's go there. I mean, obviously in the tech industry, we know we have a long ways to go still. We do not have parity. But talk a little bit about your experience, and obviously you're an incredibly successful woman. How have you navigated this? How have you prospered? And how do you think the industry needs to change? And more, we talk about this all the time, but help us be hard-hitting. What are the big things we got to do?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, this is about good business sense, and you've heard this 100 million times before. More diverse teams lead to more successful results. I think people get that. Certainly the nice people in this room get that. But then you look at what's happening, and it's just not moving. I was dispirited to see some research done by McKinsey and the World Economic Forum recently, which looked at how long to parity in various different industries.
I'm scared. I haven't read.
So I looked, selfishly at things that affect me. So I was looking at politics. Well, it's going to be 74 years before men and women reach parity in politics. Well, you might know that in the House of Lords, you get there for life. So maybe if I have my longevity of what Silicon Valley thinks I might live to 120, I might see us reach parity. Business, a bit better actually. I think it's about 35 years. I thought, well, I can live with that. Then you look at STEM, manufacturing, technology, anything to do with engineering. Never. We will never reach parity.
At this rate of change.
Because we're going backwards. We're actually going backwards. And it really matters. It really matters because we want our women and girls to be included in the future. We want them to design the best products and services. We were talking earlier.
Plus, it's an untapped workforce.
Yeah, it's an untapped workforce. And also it builds better products and services. I was recently reflecting on Alexa. How many people in this audience know a young woman called Alexa or a young girl? Well, I would imagine quite a few. Is it okay that we shout a young woman's name at a box in the corner with no please or thank you, and we expect a woman's voice to just give us an answer? I don't feel comfortable with building that in society. Thank you. I have 2 young boys, right? They're 2. We don't have Alexa at home because they have quite enough attention from their nannies as it is. I'm not having them screaming at a box in the corner without a please or a thank you. And again, I don't believe it's because the people on the Alexa team were bad people, but I bet you there were not very many women, and I bet you they didn't kind of work that through in terms of what they were naming that product. So we just have to get this right. Moral reasons, for, economic reasons. And I wish I could sit here and say, you have to do this, Robin, but it's way more complicated than that. As you know, there are 100 different things we have to do through the whole career of an individual and an organization. How we recruit, the language we use in the adverts we recruit with, how we appraise, childcare in companies, how we retain people. all of the processes. And that's why this is hard work, and that's why you aren't going to see a quick fix like that. But it takes leadership, which I understand you have at VMware, which I'm happy to hear.
And I think we're really working incredibly hard at VMware, really hard. I'm very proud of the work that we're doing. And yet sometimes you feel like you're climbing this mountain and you've been putting all your energy into it, and then you look down and realize you've moved like 4 inches.
Yeah.
You got a whole mountain ahead of you. So,
well, that is where I'm with Martin Luther King for obvious reasons, perhaps because of my accident and the stick. He says, if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. And if you can't walk, then crawl. But just keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So that's all you can do, right?
Well, all good. Okay, so we're going to run out of time here shortly, but I just have to talk about Twitter for just a moment, okay?
This is where I get myself into trouble.
But first, I want to kind of go back to when you decided to join the board of Twitter.
Yep.
Was there any angst? Did you have any kind of friction within yourself? In some ways, it feels like it's a little bit against your kind of values and your platform. And
yes.
I just want to go back to that starting point.
Good question. And I did think about it very carefully. But fundamentally, I love Twitter. I'm a super user, and I have used it myself for such massive gain professionally. When I was asked to do this work by the Prime Ministers, I didn't know about the people that were doing incredible things in remote communities in the UK, about this amazing kind of, not industry, but charitable sector around inclusion and access and digital services and public service. But Twitter helped me find those networks, which I could build so quickly, and I found people I would never normally have found, and I really did feel as though I could see the power of this tool from my own personal experience. So I started with that, because I don't think you can do anything if you don't believe in it as a product.
Get excited about it. Yes.
And then obviously when I met some of the people involved in the organization, I thought, well, I want to be a voice that's different in this boardroom. I want to try and bring the European perspective, which, as people here will appreciate, it's very, very different to the US. And I want to try and add to the conversation, because Twitter is an incredible, powerful platform. It is not the same as some of those other Silicon Valley giants. We've only just really made a profit. Yes, we have a huge, enormous reach and a big responsibility, but I wanted to be part of trying to make Twitter the best Twitter it can be in the future, because I think as a tool, it's really astonishing.
And tell us a little bit about their journey, as in especially against your platform, about responsible technology.
They are definitely, people I hope have heard Jack recently talk about conversational health on Twitter and contributing to the public discourse. So he is trying to measure this and really see whether we are contributing a net gain or a net negative, and how we can make sure that we move the dial on the important stuff. I do still believe that if we have maximum numbers of people involved in the conversation around the world and try to create that conversation in a positive way, we can do more good stuff. It may sound naive, but I still think human beings are an extraordinary force for good. And I do believe that we are at this funny sort of moment in the internet's history where we have to think, oh, did we really design for that? Well, let's design for something a bit better. And Twitter is certainly on that journey. I want to help them.
Well, there's so much noise going on right now, right? And, personal data, monetization of our data.
Yes.
You talk a lot about control of how do we get the individual and more at the center of control, but very complex issues as well. So you're an optimist that we're...
I am absolutely an optimist, because I think, look what we've done. We've done so many good things with this power, but I do believe we will look back on this period of time and just think, oh, we just needed to rejig this stuff a bit. We needed to take back control. And I think we can all do that at an individual level. We can show someone who may be not included in this journey how this incredible power is. Find someone that's not connected and help them. Ask the difficult questions at work. Provoke and tease and irritate about what this stuff should be used for. And then I think if we all work together, we can really continue to build the best possible future.
Well, that's actually a wonderful way to segue to a close here. You got, 12,500 of our best friends, in and around the Führer right now. Call to action.
Yes.
What do you want them to do and think tomorrow, like immediately, that can affect change and make a difference?
Thank you. Well, obviously, I'd love you to partner with .everyone. I want to start chapters of my organization all over Europe so that we can have an incredible movement for responsible technology. But I think about this through all aspects of society, as a citizen, as an employee or an employer, and as a user. So think about what you're using and consuming. Ask the questions of the services that you use every day. Secondly, if you're building products and services, make sure you are also asking those difficult questions about how it's going to be used, what the consequences will be. And as an individual, make sure that you are being an active citizen and involved in making sure your public employees and your public and elected officials are held to the fire about why this stuff is important. So I think as both a user, a citizen and an employee or an employer, you can take action to make sure that we feel responsible and that we are being active in these conversations. We're not stepping out of them, we're stepping into them.
Yeah, because we're part of it, right?
Yes,
Change only starts with all of us.
Exactly.
Martha, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you very much.
so much.
It's great to meet you. Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that time with Martha Lane Fox. She's absolutely an inspiration, amazing. Well, listen, this concludes our keynote for today. Thank you so much for joining us, being engaged and active. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, super productive, and we look forward to seeing you tonight at the VMworld Fest. Thank you and take care.